All right, so this is going to be my review of Episode 5, Blood Calls Blood, of Sony and Amazon's Wheel of Time show, and I'm going to treat this much like my other reviews. We're going to talk about the episode itself, completely spoiler-free at first, and then we'll give a spoiler warning, and we'll talk about it in specific examples. So, if you want to hear my thoughts on the deviations from the storyline, specific tidbits that are in the episode itself, or how I feel they're going with the first season, you need to watch the spoiler part. I'm not going to mention that spoiler-free part because I can't. It'll ruin certain elements of the show. So just so you're aware, I am going to comment on those things, but they'll happen in the spoiler version. If you're new to the channel and you don't know what I do here, I cover Wheel of Time show news, castings, leaks, and I break down a bunch of stuff from all of the episodes. I'm basically putting out one Wheel of Time video every single day. So if you like that sort of thing, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because you're not going to want to miss anything I'm putting out, because I'm putting out a ton of content. All right, so before we get into the actual review, I want to give you my scoring. My scoring for this particular episode was 7 out of 10. It was good. It wasn't absolutely phenomenal, and it wasn't terrible either. It was one of those episodes that you see in the middle of a season that sets some things up. There was a lot of exposition in this episode, a lot of explanation for certain things, a lot of world building, and a lot of focusing on certain elements. Now, there were some complaints about that, and we're going to cover them in the actual deviations from the book and the story in the spoiler section. But for the most part, I think that what they did worked really well, and it's going to help build things later on. Again, not a ton of action in this episode, not a ton of adventure, not a ton of really interesting, quick-paced things happening. It's slowed right down, a lot of character building, a lot of world building, and I like that. That's really Wheel of Time to me, because the books are fairly slow, and then they have small little bursts of action here and there, and they go back to slowing down, building the characters. So I like that about it. So the first thing we'll talk about is the actual locations, sets, costumes, props, things like that. For the most part, fantastic. Absolutely phenomenal, just like every other episode I've seen. Although there is a little complaint I have, and that's part of the reason why we knocked it down to a 7. It's not the whole reason, but it's a small part, and that's the editing. So these sets were absolutely phenomenal. However, a couple of them could have used more screen time to make them flow just a little bit better. It seemed clunky. The shots went from one spot to the next within a location, and they didn't seem to stitch together really well, at least in my opinion. Again, not a huge deal, just a small part of why it went down to a 7 rather than a 10, but I think it's due to the editing. Now we're going to talk about the acting. Again, the acting in this, top-notch. Daniel Henney stole the show as far as I was concerned. He was phenomenal. He showcased a ton of emotion. He was amazing on screen. It really built Lan's character up quite a lot for the show, and I loved seeing him do it. The second person, who is, I'm going to say, probably the best actor on the show right now. And I'm going out on a limb here. Some people are not going to agree with me, but it's Hamid Animashan who plays Loial. He is Loial. That character, wow. So there were some concerns about how he looked, and we'll talk about that in the VFX portion. But the moment that Loial started moving, started speaking, he embodied that character to the point where you know it's Loial. That's it. You're done. This is the character. I was super excited about that. As far as I'm concerned, right now he's holding the top-notch place of the best actor on the show, at least in portraying his character. I thought it was phenomenal. Hats off to you, Hamid. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about the VFX and special effects. So again, for the most part, in this episode, there wasn't a whole lot of sprawling big battle scenes or adventure or things like that that needed heavy VFX or heavy special effects. There were some small things. So some of the things that were there worked really well. Some of them, some people had questions about, and one of them happened to be the way that Loial's character looked. We'll cover that more in the spoiler section a little bit, but I do want to say that there were explanations given by the showrunner basically saying that they weren't going to change the way he looked and have a lot of special effects, heavy stuff happening with him, because it would cost more money to have him on the screen, which means he would get less screen time, and as a core character, they wanted him on the screen more. A lot of people were very concerned about that. I'm not going to lie, when I seen Loial's pictures at first, I was like, I don't really like that, but as soon as Hammond opened his mouth and started moving around, it didn't matter to me. That's Loial. That's all that mattered. So again, small points off for little things like that. But other than that, special effects and VFX are pretty good. Where this episode loses the most points is pacing. Again, I said it before, they slowed things down. This was a massive world-building episode, a massive exposition dump. They explained a lot of things. However, the way it was edited and cut together seemed a little clunky in some spots. And then there was also the thought where they could have added a bit more. So I was looking at some of the scenes like, well, there should have been more there. What's going on? And I think that's all due to the fact that Sony and Amazon are limiting the screen time. They wanted around an hour or so. They wanted 8 episodes, not 10. Rafe Judkins, the showrunner, lobbied for a 2-hour premiere and 10 episodes. And if he had gotten that, I think we would have seen a much better show. So far, most of my complaints have been about pacing and editing. It seems like they're cutting some things out that would really, really help the show, really explain some things, and really meld and mesh some things together and kind of like cohesively hold some scenes together, in my opinion, at least anyway. And that's the whole reason we kind of dropped down to a 7. Now, we're going to get into the spoiler portion of the video now. So, spoiler warning, if you haven't seen the first 5 episodes of Sony and Amazon's Wheel of Time show, be forewarned, I'm going to ruin elements from probably all 5 episodes. I'm also probably going to talk a little bit about Book 1, 2, and 3 of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. That's The Eye of the World, The Great Hunt, and The Dragon Reborn. So if you haven't read them, be forewarned, I may ruin some small parts of those books as well. Alright, now let's get into the spoiler section. Whew! Alright, now there's no stress here. I can talk about pretty much whatever I want. So we're going to spoil some things, of course. This is a spoiler section of the video, and it lets me justify some of the things I said in the first half. I hate talking about stuff and not being able to say, well, this is the examples, right? So again, I'm not going to speak too much on the locations. Phenomenal. They looked really nice. Costumes, again, looked really, really nice. Props. Everything in this episode, as far as the props go, were phenomenal. From the weapons right down to the little idols, the Forsaken idols. Just beautiful. Everything looked hand-carved, looked homemade, looked homespun. I had a really good time going through this episode at half speed when I did my Easter egg video, because I got to look at a lot of the stuff. Some people had some complaints about the way the tower looked and the stonework and stuff, but if you look at the shot with Stefan here I have on the screen, of him walking up where he's going to melt the ring, I get no complaints about that. I think it's beautiful, personally. So, really, really nice. Now, when I talked about some of the editing, this goes for the pacing, so we're going to get to that as well in the pacing section. But the editing, so some of these locations and sets were beautiful, they looked really well, but they didn't click. So, for example, when Matt and Rand went into the inn, they walked into the inn. Do any of you know the inn's name? Nope, I don't think so. It's the Light's Blessing. I know that because of leaks. However, I don't believe it was actually shown on the screen. And that's kind of an important thing, because it's a big play on the Queen's Blessing from Camelot. Now, we may see this in episode 6 and may explain it, but at this point, they've gone to the inn. Maybe we should have seen the name. We only saw from the inn their room, a portion outside the room with Rand and Nynaeve, and the library. Now, the library was beautiful. Don't get me wrong. The sets themselves are beautiful. But when we're cutting back and forth between them, I didn't get the sense that it was an inn, because you didn't see the common room. You didn't see them moving from room to room. It just went from one shot. They entered the door. They were in their room. They went from their room to other shots. They were outside their room. Then they went from outside their room to the library. Then they went from the library back and forth, a whole bunch of different spots, right? It just seemed to be cut a little bit different. And again, to me, that's all pacing and editing, and we'll talk about that more in the pacing section, not really so much on the fact that the sets were bad. The sets were fantastic. It's just they were cut together a little weird. So now we're going to talk about the acting. Again, the acting in this particular episode, top-notch by pretty much everyone. No one did a bad job. I'm going to come right out and say it. There were a couple spots where the dialogue was a little clunky. For example, when Perrin and Egwene were captured with the Whitecloaks, Valda, beautiful on the screen. Perrin's pain, absolutely amazing. The actual horror and fear and pain that Egwene was feeling, all showcased on the screen. However, it seemed to be cut just a little bit weird. And again, that's all the editing and the way they kind of stitched those scenes together. I thought they could have done a better job there. I loved them. They were powerful. They made me feel for the characters. It was great character building, just great all around. But again, a little bit of loss of points there because I didn't like the way things were stitched together. Personally, it felt a little clunky to me. But the acting, Daniel Henney, that funeral scene at the end when he's crying and banging on his chest and just showcasing everyone's grief as part of that ritual, powerful. I teared up a bit watching it. It was absolutely amazing. But the actual showstopper was Hammond Animation as Loial. When he came on the screen, again, there were some concerns about this. We'll talk about the costume, the way Loial looked. A lot of people concerns about that. The moment he spoke, done. Hammond's Loial. That's just the way it is. He is, in my opinion, right now, from his 3 minutes of screen time in this episode, probably embodying his character better than everyone else in the show. He is Loial, from the way he moved, his mannerisms, the way he spoke, his accent, the tone and cadence of his voice. He was Loial. It blew me away. I was super impressed. Now we're going to get to VFX and special effects. This is, again, they lost a little bit of points here because some of it just wasn't there. And it's not because it was bad. Rafe the showrunner has said some things about Loial's costume. People expected to see something different. They expected a tall Ogier. They expected the ears, the drooping eyebrows. They expected quite a few very telltale features, eyes the size of teacups, things like that you really expected from an Ogier. And Rafe had come on record about a week ago and warned people that they're not going to see that because we've already seen some leaked pictures of them because it would cost too much money. Putting the VFX into that or the special effects into that would cost money every single time he's on the screen, which meant that they would probably have to cut some of his scenes, and they didn't want to do that because Hammond is such a great actor. At the time, there was a lot of questioning over that. How much money would it really cost? Would they really have to cut anything? But to me, as soon as I seen Loial on screen and talking, I was happy with it, so it didn't matter. I want to hear your thoughts down below, though. What did you think of Loial? What did you think of how he looked? And I want to think of how the acting was. Like, how was Hammond? And since Hammond was so good, at least in my opinion, does it matter how he looks? I personally don't think it does, not anymore. Now we're going to get into pacing. This is where this episode lost a lot of points. Now, there were a lot of really great things about this episode. It slowed down. It explained a lot of things. It focused very heavily on the water bond. There was a lot of really neat stuff going on, a lot of world building. However, like I said earlier, things were cut together just a little bit differently. It seemed like there should have been more shots from the inn that maybe weren't involved. There should have been more shots from the tower that maybe weren't there. I think this episode could have benefited from an extra 15-20 minutes. Easily. This would have went from a 7 to a 10 in my opinion if they'd given Rafe more time to add just a little bit more, stitch things together a little bit better, make it flow a little bit more cohesively. That's just my opinion. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is the story. All right, so the first thing we'll talk about is Perrin and Egwene's little story. I'm happy with how they did it. There are some big changes from the books. However, I'm quite happy with how they did this. I'm going to level with you folks. About 90% of what happens here is not in the books throughout the whole episode, although a lot of it I think is necessary, or if it's not necessary, it's done really well, so it doesn't really matter. That's my opinion, though, however. Let me know what you folks think down below, because I know some people have some very, very strong opinions about this stuff. With that, Perrin doesn't kill any Whitecloaks. They basically torture him in front of Egwene, trying to get her to admit she channels, and she does. Very different from the books. However, I like the way it played out. I like that it showcased Perrin's ability to talk to the wolves a little bit, at least anyway, starting it in such a way that you're kind of questioning maybe he's the dragon, because some people kind of are who haven't read the books. And he's not full on talking to them yet. I like all that stuff. A little bit different than the books, and again, maybe clumsily edited in some spots, but I liked that section. Then we have Tar Valon. Basically, all the events at Caemlyn transplanted to Tar Valon. Super happy with it. I mean, am I upset they didn't see Elaine, Gowan, and Glad? I mean, I have the Gowan tattoo. Gowan's my favorite character. Am I upset I didn't get to see him the first season? 100% I am. However, I understand why, because you're not going to introduce all these characters that are going to be big components of the show later on for a minute, halfway through the first season, and then tell all the actors and actresses, well, yeah, just keep your phone on. We'll call you in a year or two. They're not going to do that. No one in the right mind would sign a contract and then break maybe potential other deals to do that. I get why they did that, plus building a full set for Caemlyn and then not using it again for a couple seasons is probably too costly. It's too cost prohibitive. Moving everything to Tar Valon, when they're going to use Tar Valon in every single season, makes sense. But from a money standpoint, introducing those characters later when they can become a bigger part of the series for a longer portion of time makes sense. I intellectually get it, so I'm okay with it. I understand why they did those things, why they made those changes. Then we have the tower. All the stuff in the tower that happened there does not happen in the books at all, but it has a purpose. Essentially, you get to see tower politicking just a little bit, so you're introduced to that. You're introduced more to the Ajas and how they work. You get to see a potential bad person, a dark friend possibly, or someone else in the tower pulling the strings here and there because some things are happening that maybe shouldn't happen, or you get to see at least the politics there that aren't great. Now remember, I did say I'd spoil the first 3 books, so I can say those things. Don't come at me in the comments saying, oh, you said you wouldn't say anything. I I liked all of that. But the big part there was the whole reason they did that arc was to showcase how a warder copes with and deals with losing his Aes Sedai. That's all basically talked about in little tidbits throughout the book series to later on when it comes to a very important plot point. But now we've seen it. We've also humanized the warders, which is a big deal in my opinion. Now, I've seen a lot of people complaining online that warders don't act like this. They're stoic warriors. They never break character. They're always big and powerful and strong and stand in the background. They never cry. They never laugh. They never whatever. That is 100% not true. I don't know what book series they read, but a lot of warders in the book series laugh, they dice, they drink, they carouse, they have fun, they play puzzles. There's all kinds of, as many different types of people there are that many different types of warders in the book series. And this showed that very easily, showed the emotion, showed how they interact with each other, showed their brotherhood. I really appreciated that, and I really appreciated the actual pain on the faces of the characters in the funeral scene at the end because, wow, that's powerful. Showcases a lot. Now, in my breakdown video, we're going to discuss all this stuff in much more detail, but people wanted to know my thoughts on the actual story for each episode, so I'm going to add that into the review. Now, that's pretty much all I have for my review. Again, 7 out of 10. Solid episode. Not the best. Certainly not the worst. Mostly lost it due to editing and some clunky little bits here and there that didn't quite fit together or could have flowed a little bit better with some more time added to the episode. Really not anyone's fault on the show except maybe the editing department and Amazon for choosing the timeline for the episode. That's pretty much it. All right. I want to thank you all very much for sticking with me here to the very end. Here's to many more.